Babysitters of Reddit, was there a time you had to call the police on the parents of the child you babysat? So what happened? We didn't exactly call the cops, but we ended up adopting the kids. My sister wanted to take up babysitting when she was about 15 and spread the word around town. Eventually a single mom at a gas station contacted her needing her 2 kids, 3 and 4, watched while she worked. She wanted them to be watched at our house, which was okay with my parents so they could kind of oversee everything. The girls were pretty well behaved, but you could tell something was up. Every day was something with the mom. She'd show up drunk, so we'd keep the girls overnight. She'd show up high of them and who know what else, so we'd keep them overnight. Also her shift ended at 9 PM and she always showed up to get the girls between 11 and 1 AM. This only went on about a week. In this week my sister was only paid for 2 days. We had found out these girls were living in their car seats in a completely illegal car with their strung out mother, occasionally couch hopping in their mother's one night stands places. Turns out we weren't the only babysitters, but we were the only good babysitters if you catch my drift. The last day my sister watched the girls, my mom and her tried talking to the mother about some options we could take and help her through as she had no family. She bolted and we didn't hear from her for a week or so. We knew she was fired from her job and my mom was trying to keep up with her through some of our degenerate family members who knew of her. Finally my mom got a call in the middle of the night from a police officer. The mother was found possibly OD in the floor of a random motel floor with her babies. She came to as she was being arrested and told them she had no family and no friends who weren't also strung out and to call the girls' last babysitters that they'll be safe there. Unfortunately that's not how it works and they were put into foster care temporarily. My mom and dad both stepped all the way up to the plate and got registered and class up to become fosters so the girls could come to our house. The court gave their mother more than one chance to get clean and take a parenting class. That's all she had to do. What did she do? She flaked. The court took away her rights. Next were the paternal rights. One girl's father had died, and the other girl's father had his own family and cooperated so his wife never found out. Then my parents fully adopted the girls. They've been my sisters for 7 years now. We love them very much and wouldn't change anything. Also for the mom, she's a missing person. The last she was seen was getting into her 18-wheeler at a truck stop estate over 5-6 years ago. I freaking love your parents. My mom ran a day home when I was 5 or 6. One of the kids who was a few years older than me kept trying to play a game with other kids where they get naked under the covers. He also kept crapping his pants. Like every day, my parents talked to him about it and wound up calling the equivalent of Child Protective Services on the parents. It turned out his mom's new boyfriend was molesting him basically every day. It broke my parents' hearts. I'm not sure what happened to him after that. I hope he's doing okay. My mom stopped running her day home after that and went into teaching adults. She had a master's in early childhood development but says she couldn't bear to be the caretaker for children anymore. Having to tell that boy's mother what she suspected was happening broke her a little. That's so terrible and heartbreaking. But I'm so glad your parents called CPS. Hopefully he is in a better living situation now. Don't know if this counts, but I used to work at a summer camp when I was a teenager. About once a week we would all walk down the street to the community outdoor pool. There were 2 girls, 5 and 8, who were very shy and stuck to themselves a lot. We only had them for about 3 days at this point. I tried to include them in games but it was like they didn't see anyone around them and just lived in their own bubbles. But one day when we were getting ready to go to the pool I was helping some of the younger kids put sunscreen on their backs. I remember asking the younger girl if I could help her and she nodded. When I lifted up the back of her shirt to get her shoulders she was absolutely covered in bruises and what I guess were cigarette burns. Every inch of her back. It was the most horrifying thing I'd seen at that point in my life. I was 16 myself, so I went to my boss and showed her the girl's back. Her older sister was exactly the same. We ended up calling the police and they came and got the girls that afternoon. The shape of the bruises almost looked like whip marks, like they were whipped with a belt until it left insane bruises. It was so sad. Never saw those girls again. As an adult who is into impact play I can attest to just how hard you'd have to hit someone with a belt for it to bruise. I'd say a belt wasn't the implement used and it might have been something more like a switch. They cut and bruise like nothing else. Yes, She had baby formula next to her M-pipe on the counter. I was young and couldn't get the baby to stop crying, so I called her and she sent some random girl over. The random girl revealed that there was a toddler asleep in the back that I didn't know about. I told my mom and she called CPS and the cops. Turns out the woman had like 2 or 3 more kids that she wasn't allowed to see. When I was young, my babysitter had to call the police twice. Once because my mom, who had limited visits with us 3 kids, came banging on her door to get us and take us who knows where. Babysitter hid us in a closet and called the cops. Second time was when we were playing hide and seek in the apartment courtyard and my brother took hide and seek a little too seriously. He refused to come out from his hiding spot and then some person said they saw him leaving with a strange man. Finally, after the cops showed up, he came out from under some bushes proud that not even the cops could find him. LOL, your brother sounds like a little crap, but I'm glad he was okay. I would have panicked the second I couldn't find him. Kids love scaring us. I had to call 911 while I was being babysat by my grandma as a kid because she had a stroke. I recognized the symptoms from the Babysitters Club. Fortunately, she made a full recovery and is still doing fine almost 20 years later. Claudia and Mean Janine and Claudia and the Sad Goodbye gave me the feels back when I was a kid. Some of those books had real talk storylines. My parents had CPS called on them when I was a baby because I had really bad diaper rash that bled a bit, and the way my diaper absorbed the blood made it look like way more than there actually was, so she thought I was being sexually abused. CPS had a doctor examine me and determined that I wasn't being sexually abused, and that was all. My mom told me about it in my 20s. Not the cops but an ambulance. My husband's cousin had just moved in an apartment down the road from me. She had 2 kids, both daycare age. One morning she called me and asked if I could watch little baby boy. She then proceeded to tell me the older one would be going to daycare but baby had a bit of a cold and daycare wouldn't allow him there. I said sure. 10 minutes later she showed up with him. He was sleeping at the time. She told me he had just eaten and would sleep for a bit. I was fine with that. She left immediately after, no meds, no directions. I had a 1.5-year-old, so I had supplies. I felt his head and he was hot. I took his temp and it was high. Way higher than it should be, so I called her work. Before cell phones. And I got her on the phone, proceeded to tell her this baby is sick, very sick, he needs to go to the air room. She refused. I called our grandmother and told her what was going on and called her dad. The whole time this baby hasn't moved. And I am starting to panic. My uncle told me to call the hospital and call an ambulance. Uncle called mom and finally got her to acknowledge how sick he was. He was in intensive care for almost a month and almost died. Because of the lack of oxygen, he has learning disabilities and pretty much will never be on his own. His mother blamed vaccines. Because of the situation, CPS then had to do a wellness check on my home. I will never forgive her for what she did to that baby and how he could have died in my care. I didn't exactly call the police myself, but I was once babysitting for a single mum who had a 3-stroke 4-year-old. She was at a strange stage of life but was essentially house sharing a council estate type house with a single dad. They weren't involved together, just housemates. He had 2 kids as well, 6 and 8 approximately. This guy was around while I babysat because I guess they had an agreement that they didn't look after each other's kids. He was nice and offered me food, although I'm pretty sure he was a bit of an alcoholic. At about 10 PM the mum of the 2 kids turned up, off her head, drunk or high, and just starts to scream and shout at the dad. She's ranting and raving about something or other and hitting him, acting like an actual maniac. She was completely crazy. I just grabbed the 2 kids that I wasn't babysitting and took them into the room with the girl I am babysitting to shelter. The mum keeps at it for a while until the dad eventually manages to shut her in a room and calls the police. They came and dealt with it. I gave a statement and that was that. It was really sad because the 2 little kids acted as if it was no big deal and they were used to it. I was pretty horrified. I didn't go back. I didn't call the police, but I came very close. There was a little boy that I babysat for as a teenager, every Friday of every other week, as no one could handle him. His grandma once showed up at a restaurant and gave him back to his parents when she watched him. He was always pretty good for me. mainly because I would let him marathon Bob the Builder. Anyway, one night I'm making him macaroni and cheese and he's playing in the living room. His parents had been gone a couple hours and it had just gotten dark out. I had put the water on the stovetop and Andy was narrating his game for me from the living room when suddenly a door in the kitchen opened and a man I had never seen before walked out of the basement and into the kitchen. He was dirty, scraggly hair, and freaky skinny. I immediately screamed and threw the not yet hot water at him. He started screaming and yelled that he was Andy's uncle and he lived in the basement. He stormed back into the basement and I called the boy's parents, who told me that the man was in fact the dad's brother, who had just been released from prison and was living in the basement. They hadn't felt comfortable leaving him alone with their 3-year-old as he had been convicted of violent crimes. So they thought it would be better if I, a skinny 15-year-old girl, was there as an intermediary. I called my dad, who came and spent the next 5 hours with me until they got home. I'm not sure the conversation they had while I was waiting in the car, but I didn't babysit for them again for a long time. Good dad. I was babysitting a 5-year-old. I let him download an app and said if your parents say to take it off you have to listen. I went to the bathroom when the parents came home. Once I got out of the bathroom I saw his dad punch him in the stomach about 13 times yelling, "I told you not to download apps." I called the cops. They came. I didn't babysit that family again. I called family services if that counts. I started babysitting for a newly single mother. She had just moved into an apartment with her 3 kids, so things were understandably, at the time anyway, a total mess. Bare mattresses on the floor, clothes in piles, no food in the cupboards. The only furniture was a couch and her bed. At first I was sympathetic. I only watched her kids for her to work as a server in the evenings and she expressed how hard she was trying to get her life together. But nothing changed at all as the weeks went by. Then she started coming in way later than when I knew the restaurant was closed, visibly messed up on drugs and alcohol. The last time I watched her daughters, she stumbled in the wee hours of the morning vomiting, completely out of her head, showing off a fresh tattoo, while earlier that same evening I had genuinely struggled to find enough food to satisfy all 3 kids. I was so sad and overwhelmed. She was paying me so well, but I realized even at 17 years old that was called hush money. I couldn't hush. I ran into the kids in a grocery a few years later with their dad and grandma, where they told me they had been living since they saw me last. They gave me hugs and looked so happy and healthy. No one but my mom ever knew about my involvement. That's not babysitting, that's heroism. Well done. I had the police while babysitting. Parents got into an accident and fled the scene. Police caught up to them in their driveway. The cops came to the door and told me to keep the kids in the back of the house so they wouldn't have to see the lights or the parents getting arrested. I agreed to stay until the grandparents got to the house. Oh, and one time my sister was babysitting for our French teacher and her ex-husband stormed in and passed out drunk on the couch and she had to call the police because he was not supposed to be there. Yikes, that's a lot. Not quite what was asked, but one time a small tornado hit next to our house while the babysitter was at our house. I got a frantic call from the babysitter where she kept repeating, "Your tree is in the driveway." It must have been pretty scary as the tree barely missed the house. We headed home immediately, but it took forever because trees were down all over the neighborhood and all the traffic lights were out. We tipped generously. The toddler was completely unfazed and having a great time playing with flashlights. As a mom of 4 little ones, this sentence made me laugh. Super relatable. Years ago I babysat 2 kids, 10 and 7. The 10-year-old was threatening us and threw his little sister out of the house. I followed and he locked us both out. Wisconsin winter, no shoes. It was near home. So I brought the girl to my place, but couldn't leave a crazy kid alone. So I returned and he let me stay with him until parents returned. This was before cell phones. I was paid $1 an hour. Tops, no apology. No sugary sodas. No maraschino cherries in the door of the fridge. Parents were wealthy. A couple years later the boy set fire to himself. I regret not doing more, but honestly, I'll never understand why his parents didn't do more. No, but their neighbors called the police on me. I used to babysit triplets just down the road from a grocery store and the parents asked me to pick some stuff you owe for them. They paid me a little extra for running the errand. Well, one of the neighbors called the police and accused me of kidnapping the kids. One family I used to babysit for decided to give me money to take their toddler to McDonald's instead of feeding him at the house. Besides the fact that I had to walk him halfway across town, our town was just big enough that everyone I saw that day didn't know me, so they all thought I was a teen mom, and I got so many judgmental looks. Technically my son's story, but I will share as he is still a minor. He had a friend over who was a little younger than him. My son was 10, his friend 8. I asked the boy's mom if it was okay to run to the store. Rural neighborhood, legally okay. Mature kids, she said it was fine. I took my youngest with me. My son calls me and says that I need to get home immediately. His friend had put on P and wanted him to watch it. I told him I was on my way home and to tell his friend to turn it off. He said, "You don't understand, mom." He told me that his dad does that stuff to him. My heart sank. I called the kid's mom and had her come to my house alone. I told her that I had to report it whether she was going to move forward with it or not. I reported it to the state, mandated reporter in obvious duty. The mom pressed charges and now the bastard is in jail. I remind my kid how much of a hero he is. Sometimes he worries that he broke up a family but knows he did the right thing. Your kid is very brave. That must have been such a tough situation. I hope he realizes someday that he did something that changed his friend's life for the good forever. I always watched this one family that had 3 kids, 11, 6, and 4. Anyway, one time I watched them and they were super excited because their dad was coming home. Military family. So we made signs and cookies to welcome him. I noticed the 11-year-old was quieter than usual, but his mother said he had started puberty and was a bit moody, so I'll let it go. Anyway, the next time I came was 2 days later because the parents wanted date night. The mom said that the 11-year-old was in his room and wouldn't come out, and if I wanted to I could try to get him to come out, but she was fine with him needing alone time. I went upstairs after a while to bring him a sandwich and I saw him leaving the bathroom. He had massive bruises on his cheek and on his arm. As soon as he saw me he ran to his room, but I caught the door before he could close it. I questioned him, very gently, about the bruises, but he wouldn't give me a straight answer, just half mumbled excuses. I immediately knew what was going on because I myself had been abused as a kid. When the parents came home I told them what I saw, but they just laughed it off. I then said that I know what abuse looks like and maybe they didn't know this was considered abuse. The father got really defensive and even raised his hand to slap me, yelling about stupid B and them being his kids and what do I know. So I called the police, and after an investigation, it turned out that he was suffering from PTSD and hitting the 11-year-old as a coping mechanism. The mother refused to believe it and kept calling the kid and me liars. Eventually, the kids were sent to family while the father went through therapy. As far as I know, the kids are all safe and happy now. Thank God. And the father got through his PTSD and is now a stable man who runs a garage. Not surprised. PTSD does that to military dads. I would know. Glad to hear he went to therapy and the kids are safe. The child, 4, was running around naked and I was trying to clothe him, and his sister, 6, said it's funny when he comes naked to the table daddy sticks his pee-pee in his mouth. I asked her to elaborate and her twin sister elbowed her and said we aren't supposed to talk about that. Holy crap. I didn't call the police, but this event was pretty freaky and fortunately everyone vulnerable got out of the situation before police were needed. During my senior year of high school, my English teacher rented out his basement to a single mother and her autistic son, and he recommended me as a babysitter. It went well for a few weeks until my English teacher suddenly got weird. During one occasion, I was doing homework when a mouse ran across my foot and screamed. He rushed down into the basement to check on me, but then decided that was the time to thoroughly check every crevice of the apartment. I thought he was just checking for mice or whatever. Cut to next week. Suddenly he was privy of stuff said that no one had told him. The mom came home one night and told me quietly she wanted to show me something and revealed she had found a bug, like a microphone, in her stuff. I was pretty shaken up. We put her son in his car seat and I drove her to the bank, and she broke down crying in my car about how he was spying on her. I assured her I was 100% on her side because he had started up some inappropriate behavior with me as well, fixing me nice dinners while he was helping me with my college essay, trying to ply me with wine, telling me his problems with his ex-wife and daughter. Then the next week, she had emailed him about something regarding a minor disagreement, and he forwarded it to me and a few of his friends. Remember, I'm 18 years old in this story, with some snarky commentary. I showed her the email immediately to inform her that her email communications weren't private. He tried to beat me out that I had betrayed his trust or whatever, but one of the email recipients, another one of my teachers, agreed with my actions and supported informing the mom of what he had done. At that point, the mom and her son moved out to live with her mother until she could find something more permanent, and I no longer went to my English teacher's house for tutoring on my essay. It was my last semester at least, so I didn't have to deal with him much longer. I don't know what his end goal was, but I'm just glad I was there for that mom and witnessed the spying so he couldn't gaslight her in her vulnerable state. You what a jerk. Glad the mom and her son got away and that you didn't have to deal with him much longer, but sorry you all had to go through that. Me and my best friend, both 14-year-old females, were to babysit together for a new young couple in the neighborhood. We arrived at their house and they seemed nice and friendly. They gave us all the instructions and told us they would just be down the street but would be out quite late. 1 AM rolls around. We had both of the kids we were watching in bed upstairs and we were both dozing on the couches in the living room. At this point the father came home, saw us dozing on the couches, screamed bloody murder at us, threw a few things, and then left while screaming that he was going to get his wife and they were going to kill both of us for endangering their house and kids. It was obvious that he was drunk, smelled of booze, and possibly coked out. My friend freaked out, so I sent her upstairs to guard the kids. I called my friend's dad because he was only 5 houses away from us. I told him what happened. He said lock the door and he would call the cops and be over right away. I locked the door, grabbed a huge kitchen knife, and stood guard. Her dad showed up just as the parents arrived. The wife attacked my friend's dad while the husband kicked in the door of his house. The cops arrived just as he smashed the door off its hinges. Small town, local RCMP attachment only 20 blocks away. 3 cars arrived with 5 cops. The cops took down all 3 adults but sorted out pretty quickly who was a problem. The one cop walked in on me, commented on the knife I was holding, and asked if I, and if everyone else in the house, was okay. The parents were arrested. I assume child services was called for the kids. My friend went home with her dad, and I was driven home by the cops. My dad came to the door when I got home and the police talked to him because they wanted him to know what happened and that I wasn't hurt or in trouble. My mom, being the nut job she was decided that the situation was still my fault and grounded me. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.